The image you see before you was very carefully chosen. It represents, in very stark terms, the choices that we face. Our actions will determine whether we have a green, sustainable Earth suitable for human habitation, or a hot, humid, inhospitable, possibly uninhabitable Earth, if not for us, then for generations yet to come. I'm Phil Webster, and I'm wearing two hats today. First, I am the co-lead of the UUCC Climate Crisis Team. We are known as 2U4C. Secondly, I am the lead advocate for climate in the UU Legislative Ministry of Maryland, or UULM-MD, often abbreviated as UULM. 2U4C has a theme each month. This month it is legislative action, since the Maryland General Assembly convenes on January 10th and runs for 90 days. In this video, I will outline the legislative priorities for UULM in Annapolis this year. UULM is a statewide action network of Unitarian Universalists who work to educate, engage, and mobilize UUs to advocate for specific issues before the Maryland General Assembly. To build the beloved community we seek, we work to transform our world from one dominated by a culture of economic self-interest, competition, white supremacy, and paternalism to one that builds cooperative communities that promote the common good and reinforce a society built on mutual obligations. In addition to climate, we have action teams working on various issues. The number of the teams varies from year to year and is based on major issues of the day. The legislative process in Maryland is extremely complicated. It is not at all simple like the image on the left. Somehow all the loops and dead ends have been omitted from the diagram. Some of the complexity is implied in the verbiage, and that is an overview. The good news is you don't have to know this to be effective. UULM co-founder is a UU from Frederick and was a professional lobbyist in Annapolis before his retirement. He has infused UULM with his knowledge and experience. And we have a software tool to enable you to contact your legislator, among other things. I'll return to the tool a little bit later in this talk. Each year before the session, we meet with several coalitions of climate and environmental justice groups. There are many in Maryland. The coalitions meet with legislators during the fall. The legislators depend on advocates and are quite open to modifying their bills to gain support from the advocate community. This year, there were about 30 bills. UULM selects several bills to support based on the 2nd and 7th UU principles: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and the respect for the interdependent web of life, of which we are a part, respectively. Here are our three priority bills for the 2024 legislative session. Empower, the Maryland Energy Efficiency Act. Empower is Maryland's home energy efficiency program. It is run by the utilities with guidance from the state. It was originally formed in 2008 to save ratepayers money on their electric bills, and it has been successful, saving over $4 billion. This was, in part, accomplished by encouraging and incentivizing switching over to methane gas and away from electricity for home heating and hot water. There are two issues with the program as it is currently implemented. First, Empower is out of alignment with the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022, which includes greenhouse gas reduction targets. Utilities, through Empower, are incentivizing the purchase of gas appliances and not electric ones, which should not be the case if we are to meet the greenhouse gas reduction goals. Utilities are now building out the gas infrastructure, which will become stranded assets and will have to be paid for. Secondly, Empower has not been effective for low to moderate income communities. Middle and upper income communities have received a greater portion of the benefits than low to moderate income communities. Many of the Empower programs consist of tax credits and rebates, which would require investment of scarce financial resources for those in low to moderate income communities. This legislation would correct each of these flaws. The second priority bill is the Maryland Department of Energy Permitting Authority. A similar bill was introduced last year and called the Climate and Labor Equity Bill, which did not advance. Aggregating of polluting industries and underserved populations has led to overexposure to pollution, resulting in detrimental health impacts. Maryland law now has definitions of underserved and overburdened communities, and combining these definitions, you can get an environmental justice score for each community. However, the Maryland Department of the Environment does not have the legal authority to consider the environmental justice score when making permitting decisions in these communities. This legislation will give the Maryland Department of the Environment that authority when they consider renewing, reauthorizing, or denying permits in these communities. The third priority bill is the Climate Crisis and Environmental Justice Act. This is a complicated bill, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it. This legislation would create a carbon fee for all fossil fuels at the first point of sale in Maryland. This is referred to as the social cost of carbon. And having a fee is a good thing. The intent is to raise money for mitigation, resiliency, and adaptation to climate change, and would raise over $18 billion over a 10-year period. Governor Moore has recently stated that Maryland needs $1 billion per year to address the impacts of climate change. This bill would create two carbon fees, one of non-transportation fuels and one on transportation fuels. These two different fees will have different starting values, escalation rate, and caps. It is worth noting that both of these are significantly below the current estimation of the social cost of carbon, which is about $200 per ton. This legislation would also create two funds to mitigate inequities that might arise from fees, and the total fees will be split between them. The Household and Employer Benefit Fund would go directly to impacted individuals and employers, and the Climate Crisis Infrastructure Fund would go to environmental justice communities and local governments to fund adaptation and mitigation projects. In addition, there are 4 really good bills of interest that we are watching. We do this if we need to pivot away from one of the priority bills or possibly add a new priority. These are Renew, and this legislation would place a $900 million fee per year on historical polluters to pay for mitigation and adaptation. Recall Governor Moore's statement that Maryland needs $1 billion per year. Significant costs for remediation of climate damage are being borne in other parts of the state budget. For example, Ellicott City is building an 18-foot diameter tunnel costing over $130 million to manage rainwater runoff. Examples abound all over the state, and projections are that things will get much worse. This money could be spent on other things like schools, public health, and transportation. The Clean Water Justice Act. The U.S. Supreme Court drastically reduced the scope of the Clean Water Act in its decision on Sackett versus the EPA. Wetlands and streams are no longer protected by the Clean Water Act. However, they are still protected under state law. This legislation would give Maryland citizens standing to sue in state courts to stop pollution or to compel a state agency to act. Solar siting and initiatives. Current regulations and decisions regarding commercial solar installations vary greatly across Maryland counties and localities. Some counties are providing oversized proportion of the required solar capacity under state law, while others are providing little or none. There are also competing demands for land use which need to be considered together. First is achieving solar energy deployment goals. The second is to protect agricultural economy and food security in Maryland. And the third is achieving a 40% land conservation by 2040, something that was mandated in legislation passed just last year. This legislation would require that all counties participate in commercial solar installations, and it would also establish a working group of agencies and stakeholders to deploy a plan for solar installations. And finally is the Better Buildings Act. The requirement for the electrification of new buildings was the first recommendation of the Maryland Climate Change Commission. It was a part of the Climate Solutions Now Act as it was introduced in 2022. There was significant pushback, citing concerns about the ability of the electrical grid to handle such a load. The legislature substituted a grid study in order to push through the Climate Solutions Now Act. The grid study has been completed and reports that the utilities can easily meet not only the requirements for electrification of new buildings, but for the retrofitting to electrification of existing buildings as well. This legislation will require that all new buildings produce zero Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions. All that is needed to implement these things is participation of UUs from around the state. Imagine there is a vote in a subcommittee coming in a few days. What is needed is for every legislator on that subcommittee to hear from her UU constituents. This is where the software tools come into play. Remember, I promised to get back to using our software tools. The most effective tool that we have is the Action Alert. It will send an email to every UU that has a relevant legislator on short notice explaining the issue and why we need your action. It will also contain an email written for you. It is an editable email, which is great if you have just a moment to edit it just a bit to catch the attention of your legislator. And just a click will send the email to your legislator. It is that simple. To implement this, all we need are three things from you. First, your email address. Secondly, your home address, which is how we know who your legislators are. And most importantly, we need you to read the email and take action right away. Things in Annapolis move really fast, and we've got to move very quickly when these votes are scheduled. To get your info into our database, we need you to go to UULM-MD.org/take-action and click on participate. There's that word participation again, and fill out a simple form. That is all it takes. Jointly, we can make progress in the fight for a livable future. Thank you for joining in today. If you have any questions or want more information or want to get more involved in UULM-MD, my email address is at the bottom. Thanks again.